You can't think of anything, and yet you have to begin and, to really prepare your client for the worst in the case. So you have to be thinking, what if he does get convicted as a defense attorney? As a district attorney, there's not a lot to think about. I mean, if he's convicted, the judge will take over from there. He'll quickly remand him into custody. But I'll tell you, this is one of the worst times in the trial. Now, what happens, remember, the jurors come out with that verdict form where they've given them to the clerk already. The clerk hands them to the judge. I'm telling you, the 10 seconds it takes for the clerk to hand it to the judge feels like 20 minutes. The judge opens each one and goes through. Go ahead.
Right. Let me ask Ron Richards a follow-up question on what you just said, and that is about preparing your client for the worst. Ron, has Tom Mesereau had the conversation with Michael Jackson? Has Tom Mesereau sat Michael Jackson down and said, Michael, look, we don't want to deal with this. We don't want to think about this, but we've got to address the possibility that you're going to be convicted. Here's what's going to happen. Has he had that conversation with him?
I think they've had some sort of conversation with him, Dan, but Michael Jackson is in a very delicate state right now, and I think that they really want to appear optimistic. I think it's important to your client that you have confidence in the work you've done, and I don't think they had a lot of Plan B discussions about how it's going to work if the judge remands you into custody. I'm sure they had, I'm sure they had more discussions like, we're going to ask for bail pending sentencing. Let's see what the counts are, because if you start having these machinations with your client, you could push him into a really bad state, and I think he's already in a bad state as it is.
I don't know. I got to tell you, I think that Michael Jackson needed to hear it. I mean, we are all talking about the fact that none of us can predict this, that we think it's just as likely that he'll be acquitted as convicted. As a result, I think it's his obligation to sit there and say, look, here's what's going to happen. You've got to be ready for this. Michael Cardoza, do you not see that happening?
Oh, no, Dan, I do it with every one of my clients. You never know what a jury will do. Look at the O.J. Simpson trial. I mean, there's a classic example. No one thought a not guilty verdict would come in. In this case, I'm telling you, you've got to sit with Michael. I sort of agree with Ron, but it's your ethical obligation as a defense attorney to sit with Michael and really have a come to reality with him and say, Michael, if you are convicted, here's what will happen. Here are our plans. And if you don't, you're going to see that poor guy fall apart in that courtroom. You've got to talk with him, whether you push him over or not.
We've just gotten this information in. Michael Jackson will be arriving at the courthouse at 4:45 Eastern Time, 1:45 Pacific Time. The judge had wanted to read the verdict at 1:30 Pacific Time, but that is not going to happen because Michael Jackson and his team are going to be a little bit late to court. Seems apropos for the way this case has gone so far. Susan Filan is here with me as we wait for this verdict to be announced. Susan, you've been here every day. These are the same fans who yell, Susan Filan is this, Susan Filan is that, yelling and screaming at you as you come into the courthouse, and yet they seem surprisingly subdued. The bottom line is, it seems to me that these fans are probably as nervous as everyone else.
I agree with you. I can't believe how quiet. It's almost like we're in the eye of the hurricane before the storm. It's this eerie, quiet feeling here. I expected chaos and pandemonium. Now, maybe part of that is security is doing a terrific job. These sheriffs have this place buttoned down tight. You've got local law enforcement that's cordoned off the streets. It's very secure here, but still it's eerily quiet, and I did expect an uproar. There was an initial uproar when we heard there was a verdict. I think there's going to be chaos and pandemonium again once the verdict is announced, but it is odd and eerily quiet at the moment.
This, as we wait for a verdict in the Michael Jackson case. Michael Jackson expected to arrive in about 15 minutes or so, and then he'll have to come into court, get settled, get ready, invite the jurors in, and that verdict will be read live, and you'll be able to hear it live here on MSNBC. We've got a live audio feed coming from that courthouse to bring you the verdict. You'll hear it at exactly the same time that we do on all 10 counts against Michael Jackson. Susan, is it still possible that they are hung on certain counts, that they were not able to reach a unanimous verdict on certain counts?
Dan, I don't think so, and here's why. There is something called a dynamite charge that a judge gives to a jury when they tell the judge they can't reach a decision. And it basically says, go back in there and try again. Nobody knows this case better than you, Dan. We're hearing some noise in the background. I don't know what that is. Yelling and screaming and cheering.
I can tell you what it is. I just turned around. It is the press corps heading into the courthouse. Not particularly popular with the Jackson fans these days. The members of the national and international media heading into court, and the fans jeering and booing as they head in. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, again, I don't think that you've got a deadlocked jury here because, again, I think the judge would have instructed this jury, go back and try again. Nobody knows this case better than you. Nobody's deliberated harder and longer than you. Don't change your mind just to change your mind, but go back and listen to your fellow jurors. I have to think that even this judge, who's kept so much a secret from us, somehow we would have found out that the dynamite charge was given. And without that, I have to believe that we have unanimous verdicts on all 10 counts. We don't know what they are, guilty or not guilty, but I don't think we have a hung jury.
And let's be clear, Michael Cardoza, they could also be split as to the verdict, meaning they could say guilty on 2 counts of committing a lewd act upon a child, but not guilty of the other 2, not guilty of conspiracy, guilty of one or 2 of the alcohol charges, but not guilty on the others.
Yeah, I agree with Susan. They definitely have verdicts on all 10 counts in this case. And I agree with you, too. They could find him guilty of count 2 and 3. Remember, that's where the accuser actually said he molested me. Counts 4 and 5 are the brother of the accuser saying, my brother was asleep and Michael Jackson molested him. They could find him not guilty of those counts. So they could go anyway. You know what will be interesting, Dan, though, is after these verdicts are read, the attorneys will be asked, do you want the jury polled? And that means the judge will have to go through, with the clerk asking the question, through each count. Is this your verdict? Juror number 1, yes or no? And then they have to go through all 12. And they have to do that for all 10 counts. And you bet the losing side is going to do that in this case, because there have been times where jurors on being polled go, no, you know what? I've changed my mind. No, I'm not voting guilty. It's not guilty.